There was a lull in my life, as if the calm before the storm. There was an eerie quiet before the deafening thunder. My overly scheduled calendar of commitments and presentations was swiped clean. Everything was canceled. I had nothing to do. Even patients weren't showing up to the hospital. The emergency was quiet, as if post-apocalyptic, as if everyone had died from COVID already. This was April 2020. My usual work life is chaos. Work is insane. There are critically ill people, violent people, people on drugs, people getting arrested, people who have broken bones and sprained toes. There's people having heart attacks and old grandmas who are confused. This is life in the emergency, and I love it. But then suddenly, over a span of days, people stopped showing up, and it was terribly unsettling. And that's when I was forced to sit with the quiet in my life. Don't get me wrong, I didn't have any great revelations then. In fact, I had extreme anxiety. I couldn't sit still because I like to move. I later realized that my anxiety manifests in my inability to sit still and my constant overscheduling. The discomfort with the lull led me to quickly join committees, attend all the meetings, try to learn all the things so I could be the best doctor at this time. But I also did it to not feel the feelings. So it manifested as anxiety. At the root of a lot of my anxiety was this duty to care at odds with my personal safety. I am hardwired to care for others having an emergency. And then suddenly we were told, if someone collapses in front of you, you cannot simply start CPR right away. We were told there is no emergency in a pandemic, that we must absolutely protect and care for ourselves and our colleagues before we care for our patients. We needed to be in proper PPE and safe surroundings before we start CPR. We needed to care for ourselves first in order to continue to care for others. It took every ounce in me not to jump to start CPR on a patient. We know that time is precious when your brain is not being perfused. And this was really hard to deal with. My duty to care was and still is very strong. But this pandemic has really pushed me to consider my own personal safety. I began to worry about walking into small enclosed spaces to care for patients who are known COVID positive. In my head, my duty to care was at strong odds with my fear of personal safety. I became more and more aware of the risks involved in taking care of COVID positive patients, and it scared me a lot. There were days when I literally had my face in a patient's face as I put an endotracheal tube into their throats so we could hook them up to a ventilator so they could breathe. I did it because I knew I had to, and a big part of me wanted to, and a big part of me did not want to. I felt like an unwilling hero. This is Dr. Breen. She was an emergency physician in New York. We watched in sheer horror at how New York was forced to place dead bodies into refrigerated trucks because hospital morgues were overwhelmed. This is absolutely devastating to learn about and watch, but when you are the one trying to save these lives, it is a different kind of hurt. It's a moral injury. Dr. Breen committed suicide on April 26, 2020. She was an emergency physician just like me, and I could identify with her experience working in the emergency. Although we didn't see the numbers that New York saw, the projections of what Calgary was going to see and how our healthcare system was going to be overwhelmed was panic-inducing. I used to love the work I did, and suddenly I spent hours before work trying to calm myself enough to show up to work ready to help others. One day, I sat in my car, parked in the hospital underground garage. I sat in the dark of my car and thought to myself, is today the day? Is today the day that all the critically ill COVID patients show up and we run out of space and ventilators? Is today the day that the exponential rise in cases occur and I will be there, unable to keep up, unable to care, rationing resources? That was the day I took a deep breath and said, Huma, you have to show up, but you have to show up at your best, and you are not at your best. Now, how is this relevant to you? Well, I realized that my life was not on pause. I realized that I was anxious, and underlying the anxiety were strong feelings of anger, fear, sadness. I want to share with you how I made an effort to find my way as a frontline healthcare worker in this pandemic, but more importantly, as a human being looking for well-being in life despite external circumstances dictating the opposite. I realize that the world continues to turn on its axis, the nights continue to turn into days, and I continue to grow older. My journey living through this pandemic was not going to be completely about fear and anxiety. I was supposed to be working on a master's project at the beginning of 2020. When the pandemic was declared, I ended up pivoting my master's project. I decided to do a first-person inquiry into the mental health of an emergency physician working during the COVID-19 pandemic. I was initially resistant to the idea of exploring what was going on in my head, but quickly realized that this was an incredible and timely opportunity for me to learn more about me and how to lead myself. Like any academic, what better way to understand something than research it? The mess that was in my head needed to be studied, analyzed, and understood better. So I journaled, I coded, and themed my journaling, and there were many themes that arose. I want to share with you some of the most profound learning for me, which I think you might relate to. I am now able to understand my brain better and recognize what truly improves my happiness and experience of life. I am learning to lead myself. Dr. Sonia Lyubomirsky is a PhD in positive psychology and has dedicated her career to studying happiness and what determines happiness. We each have a genetic set point, something that our parents give us when it comes to our own happiness. It comprises 50% of our happiness in our lives. What was groundbreaking for me was learning that life circumstances only influence my well-being and your well-being by 10%. I felt like COVID was my life and like it was taking up 100% of my well-being, but it truly only comprises 10% of my happiness. Further to this, there are intentional activities we can do to influence our happiness. These intentional activities were outlined in a free online course I did called The Science of Wellbeing. Here they are. I found a clear correlation with the themes that came up in my journaling with what science shows truly improves your well-being. When I was kind to the person in front of me, I expressed gratitude for what I had, I savored an experience, I exercised and slept. When I connected with another in a meaningful way and also through meditation, I didn't live in the past or the future. I was here in the right now, and that's when and how I was the happiest. There are so many ways to integrate these into your life. I want to focus a little bit on kindness. For kindness at work, I started to sit with patients a little longer. I stayed a little more quiet. I kept room for silence, and the patients started to fill the silence with their worries. They emptied their hearts that were overflowing with concerns. They offloaded, and they were different. I like to think I offered them kindness and compassion. Again, for kindness, in the early hours of one morning at work, I gave a young patient a devastating diagnosis of cancer. Of course, he was completely alone at the time because families are not allowed to be present. I sat there in full gown, mask, goggles, gloves, and gave this young person probably some of the worst news of his life. And I couldn't connect the way I wanted to. The PPE does not allow for human connection. So I did something I had never done before. After I shared the news and let it sit with him for a little bit, I asked if he was hungry and bought him a coffee and snack from Tim Hortons. I couldn't hug him, but I could show him compassion and kindness. I like to think that he felt a little less alone, knowing that there are kind people who will help him through this. I have declared more deaths in the last year than I have in any other year of my career. People are dying, surrounded by nurses and doctors and other strangers they have never known. Family has been mostly banned from being present in the hospital, again because of COVID. Our usual process is calling a time of death and moving on to logistics, paperwork, and other business. But now we are trying to be more present with the human being that just died. When I call time of death, I say that person's full name. I ask for a moment of silence to acknowledge the life and death of this human being. These are a few of the ways I've been fostering kindness and compassion into my work and into my life. These moments force me to be present, to not be anxious, to feel my feelings, and show someone else love and compassion in ways I wouldn't have normally. These moments of kindness improve my personal well-being and are helping me find my way through this pandemic. I want to leave you with a thought. Where can you create opportunities to be kind and improve your well-being while living through this pandemic? This is Dr. Corinne Dion. She committed suicide in January of 2021. She was an emergency physician working in the front lines of the pandemic in Granby, Quebec. I share this photo of her to remind us to be kind to ourselves and to each other. Thank you very much.